वेलकम एवरीवन। हाय गाइस, हाउ आर यू? कैसे हैं आप सब? जैसा कि आपको मालूम है, कई दिनों से हमारी रेस्ट फ्रेमवर्क की एक सीरीज मुकम्मल चल रही है, जेंगो रेस्ट फ्रेमवर्क, जिसे डीआरएफ भी कहते हैं, जेंगो रेस्ट फ्रेमवर्क। और अगर आप इस चैनल पे नए हैं तो सब्सक्राइब कर लें, कोड विद हाफिज अभी। इफ़ यू आर न्यू ऑन दिस चैनल, डोंट फॉरगेट टू सब्सक्राइब एंड लाइक, बिकॉज ऑन दिस चैनल we are completed the Django Python, and now it's time to complete the Django DRF from A to Z, from beginner to advanced level. So please keep in touch with us to complete your REST framework concepts as soon as possible with the simplest and easy way. So in today's session we are going to cover what is REST and REST API in Django. So basically, the REST, it is an architectural guideline to develop web API. Let before this session, we cover what is an API and what is an web API. If you not see this session, check on our channel Code with Hafiz, and then you will come here to complete this with us, what is REST and REST API in Django. So let's start. So the first one is, what is REST in Django? REST is an architectural guideline to develop web API. जैसे कि हमने पिछले सेशन में पढ़ा था वेब API क्या होता है। तो जो REST है वो बेसिकली एक आर्किटेक्चर है, गाइडलाइन है, आर्किटेक्चर है, और ये बेसिकली हमें गाइडलाइन प्रोवाइड करता है कि किस तरह हम वेब एपीआई बनाएंगे यूजिंग Django DRF. तो REST is an architectural guideline to develop web API. Now, what is REST API in Django? Please note the definition with you if you note it. This is up to you, or continue with us. So what is REST API? The API which is developed using REST is known as REST API or RESTful API. जो REST API है इन Django में वो क्या होते हैं? बेसिकली जो API developed हो using REST architecture is known as REST API or RESTful API. I hope this will make sense. मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ कि यहाँ तक आपको क्लियर होगा. Let me understand you with the help of this example, with the help of this diagram. In this diagram, we have a database, and database is connected with web application. Let's assume this web application is built with the help of Django, Java, or any server-side language. So let's assume this is built with Django, and after that we are using REST Web API. So why we are using REST Web API? Because we just give one side, the web application directly access this web application. If we need the Android side and any other, so that in that case you have to build the web API with the help of this web API. Your devices, different devices, the Android side, as you know, the Android code is different from the web code. So in this case, if the website want some data from this application, so this will request to this web API, and then this web API will goes to this web application. And if user wants some data to show on this web, then this will in the response show us the data on the front side. And the same in the Android side, the Android client also send the request to show data from this DAP, and this data is on this server. So this will first come this request to the REST Web API, and then the request of Android web client will send to the web application, and then response the data. And let me please note this point: the response data is in JSON data or in XML data. So let's move forward. मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ कि यहाँ तक आप लोगों को समझ आ चुका होगा। बेसिकली होता क्या है कि जो ये वेब एप्लीकेशन है, आप एज्यूम करें कि ये जेंगो में या जावा में या PHP में बनी हुई कोई भी सर्वर साइड लैंग्वेज की मदद से ये वेब एप्लीकेशन बनी हुई है, और इस वेब एप्लीकेशन का जो कनेक्शन है वो डेटाबेस में है। एज्यूम करें इस डेटाबेस के अंदर कुछ डेटा पड़ा हुआ है रिलेटेड स्टूडेंट्स के, ठीक है। और अगर मैं यहाँ पर वेब API नहीं यूज़ करता तो ये सिर्फ और सिर्फ इस ये जो वेबसाइट यहाँ पर ये जो क्लाइंट जो वेब यूज़ कर रहे हैं वो रिक्वेस्ट करेगा डेटा का स्टूडेंट इंफॉर्मेशन, तो ये रिक्वेस्ट आएगी इस वेब सर्वर पे, और यह वेब सर्वर इन द रिस्पांस JSON डेटा और XML डेटा इन द फॉर्म ऑफ रिस्पांस सेंड करेगा इसको। सेम इन द केस एंड्रॉयड यूज़र अगर रिक्वेस्ट करता है कि यार हमें ये चाहिए, तो आप जानते हैं एज ए डेवलपर द एंड्रॉयड कोड इज़ डिफरेंट फ्रॉम द वेब when you develop web application. So in this case we need the REST API, the REST web API. This will handle all the different clients to handle the request and send the response from the same server. I hope this will make sense for you. So it's time to understand how REST API works in Django. If you are new on this channel, don't forget to subscribe. How REST API works in Django. Let me understand you with the help of this diagram. How REST API web works. So let's assume we have client using the Android. Client makes HTTP request to API, the web API. This client makes request. The request is HTTP using protocol of HTTP request to API. API will communicate to web application or with database if needed. If not needed, just give the response in the form of data, JSON data or XML data. So first of all क्या होगा कि ये एंड्रॉयड क्लाइंट जो है वो रिक्वेस्ट करेगा HTTP रिक्वेस्ट, वो रिक्वेस्ट रिसीव होगी इस API को, ठीक है। ये API कम्युनिकेट करेगी इस वेब एप्लीकेशन के साथ जो कि Django या जावा या कोई भी सर्वर साइड लैंग्वेज में बनी हुई है। तो उसके साथ जब ये कम्युनिकेट करेगी, अगर उसको डेटा बेस से कुछ डेटा चाहिए होगा तो वो वहाँ भी कम्युनिकेट करेगी ये वेब एप्लीकेशन। देन वेब एप्लीकेशन, अगर ये जो वेब एप्लीकेशन उसको डेटा बेस से भी कुछ चाहिए, अगर नहीं भी चाहिए तो फिर ये प्रोवाइड रिक्वायर्ड डेटा, जो भी क्लाइंट को डेटा चाहिए, जो भी रिक्वायर्ड डेटा क्लाइंट को चाहिए, तो ये वेब एप्लीकेशन क्या करेगी, इन द रिस्पांस प्रोवाइड करेगी, और ये API रिटर्न करेगी रिस्पांस डेटा टू क्लाइंट. दिस रिस्पांस डेटा विल बी इन द फॉर्म ऑफ JSON डेटा और XML डेटा. मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ कि यहाँ तक आप लोगों को समझ आ चुकी होगी. लेट्स मूव फॉरवर्ड. Now it's time to understand you what is CRUD operations in Django or any language. So what is CRUD operation? Basically CRUD stands for create, read, update and delete. In REST API we have also CRUD operations. Let me show you. So in REST API, as you see in the image, the CRUD operations. In REST API we have CRUD operations: create, read, update and delete. And for create operation we are using HTTP method post, and the post method is used for creating, posting and inserting data. And then we have operation read. R stand for read, and we will be going to use this. The HTTP method for read is get, and then this get is used for reading, getting, retrieving data from the database. And then we have U. The U stand for update, and the HTTP method for update is put at patch, updating data. The put and patch will be used for updating data. Complete update will be done with the help of put method, and partial update will be done with the help of patch HTTP method. And then we have D. D stand for delete, and the HTTP method for delete is delete, and this will be used for to delete data from the DB. So these are some covered operation we will cover in the REST API. Are going to cover in the REST API sessions. So let's keep in touch with us. मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ कि ये ऑपरेशंस आपको समझ आ चुके होंगे कि किस चीज़ के लिए है क्रिएट, रीड और अपडेट डिलीट। ये करंट ऑपरेशंस हैं। और क्रिएट के लिए जो HTTP मेथड हम यूज़ करते हैं वो पोस्ट है, फिर रीड के लिए गेट है, अपडेट के लिए पुट पैच है और डिलीट के लिए डिलीट है। और पोस्ट हम किस लिए यूज़ करते हैं? अगर हमें कुछ क्रिएट करता है, पोस्टिंग करती है, इंसर्टिंग डेटा इन द DB, देन वी यूज़ HTTP मेथड पोस्ट। उसके बाद रीडिंग, गेटिंग और रिट्रीविंग डेटा के लिए गेट हम यूज़ करते हैं। अपडेटिंग डेटा जो पुट मेथड है वो कंप्लीट अपडेट करता है और जो पैच है वो पार्शियल अपडेट करता है। इसके अलावा हमारे पास डिलीटिंग डेटा विद द हेल्प ऑफ HTTP मेथड डिलीट। Let's say we have a student API resource. The student API resource have three parts: base URL, naming convention, and resource of API or endpoint. Let me show you what is the student API look like, or let me show you what is the base URL in the student API resource, naming convention, and resource of API or endpoint. As you see, the codewithhafiz.com/API and students in the URL bar. So in this URL, as you see here, in this we have codewithhafiz.com/API and students. We have also http:// in URL, but to understand you what are these three parts, the first one is the base URL. The base URL in this case codewithhafiz.com, and the naming convention is API. As you see, the second part is the API, the naming convention, and the third one, resource of API or endpoint, is students. This is the resource of API or endpoint. The second one is naming convention, and the base URL is codewithhafiz.com. I hope this will make sense for you. As you see, the base URL, naming convention, and source of API or endpoint. This is the three part of student API resource. So it's time to understand you how request and response process work in the REST API. If you request for all students, then we are using the get method of HTTP, and after the base URL we have naming convention API, and then resource of API is students. This endpoint, students endpoint, will show you in the response ID1 name Rahul and ID2 name Sonam. So if we request this to get all students from the DB, in the response of this request we will get this data. These are some example to understand you how the request and response process is working in REST API. So request for all student, the URL, the resource, students API resource will be looking like this, as you see here. Let's move next. To create some data or insert some data or post some data, then we have a method post, as we learn. So the request posting, creating and inserting data. For requesting, the posting, creating and inserting data, as you see, our naming, after the naming convention we have the endpoint or resource of API, the students, and with the help of post method I am going to insert name submit, and the ID of this will be in the response. As you see, ID is 11 and the name is submit. In this way you will insert, create and post data creating data and inserting data with the help of post method of HTTP. So these are request and response for the post, and if you want to update, then request and response will be like this. Request for updating data ID 1. As you see, put or patch, we have two options to use, put or patch. If we update all data, then we will use put, and if you want to update just name, then we have an option to use patch. So in this student API resource, as you see, after the naming convention, we have endpoint students and we have the ID 1. The student ID 1, we are going to change name to Raj with the help of patch. This will update the name Raj. So this is for request response process of updating data. And if you want to get only the one data, then request and response looks like this. As you see, after the naming convention API, I am using get method of HTTP. After that, we have endpoint or resource of API students. This after the endpoint students, we have ID, and in this way you will get only the student 1 data, as you see in the response. And if you perform the delete CORRUD operation, then request response look like this. Request for deleting data ID 1. Then after the endpoint, as you see, we are using the HTTP method of, and then after the naming convention we have endpoint, and after that we have ID of student. So I am going to delete the ID of 1 with the help of this request. The method is delete. Then in the response, ID 1 name Raj, and some logic we use to print on the front side. So this Raj is deleted with the ID 1. So we will see in the later, we will see inshallah in the next coming sessions. Don't forget to subscribe and like. And in this image, I am going to show you what are the student API resources looking like. Forget to get all students API. After the API is a naming convention and the endpoint is students. If you want to get only the one student's data, then student API resource look like this, students 1. And if you want to post some data, to create and insert some data in the DB, that time your student API resource is looking like this. And then we have to update some data, like we want to change the ID as well as the name. That time I am going to use the put API students 1 for the student 1 ID. And if you want to change the first name and the last name, that time you will use put. And if you want just the first name, that time you will use the ID of a student which you want to change this first name, and your student API resource is looking like after the base URL is like this. And if you want to delete the ID of a student 1, that time your naming convention, after the naming convention your endpoint look like this. I hope this will make sense for you. If any doubt till now, please comment it. मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ कि यहाँ तक आप लोगों को समझ आ चुका होगा कि what is REST and what is REST API and what are the HTTP method and protocol and how we will use these methods. If any doubt, कोई भी question हो comment करिए. Thanks for watching.